World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history. Over 70 million lives lost, and the outcomes shaped the entire modern world. But history is never guaranteed. What if the war had ended differently? What if the Allies had lost, or the Axis powers had pushed forward? Today, we'll journey through alternate endings of World War II and imagine how our world might look today. Let's start with the most chilling possibility. What if Nazi Germany had won? By 1941, Hitler's forces controlled most of Europe. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, had succeeded. Germany could have conquered Russia's vast lands and resources. Imagine a map, Europe from France to Moscow, under a single Nazi regime. Democracy across the continent? Gone. Millions more lives lost under fascist rule. And America? Without Britain as a launching point for D-Day, the US might never have gained a foothold in Europe. Today, the United States might be isolated, watching a Nazi superpower dominate half the globe. Now, let's say the Allies still won, but much later. What if D-Day had failed? The longer the war dragged on, the greater the chance of using nuclear weapons, not just in Japan, but in Europe. Imagine cities like Berlin, Paris, or even London reduced to ashes. The world after such a war would not just remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it might remember nuclear devastation across multiple continents. The Cold War might never have been between the US and the Soviet Union. It could have been between a devastated, radioactive Europe and the surviving powers. In August 1945, after 2 atomic bombs, Japan surrendered. But what if it didn't? The US had planned an invasion called Operation Downfall, expected to cost millions of lives on both sides. Entire Japanese cities could have been destroyed, and more atomic bombs were already being prepared. This would have delayed the war by years, drained US resources, and possibly allowed the Soviet Union to dominate more of Asia. Korea, China, even Japan itself might have fallen under Soviet control, completely rewriting the balance of power in the Pacific. No matter how you change the outcome, one thing is certain: the Cold War would look completely different. If Germany had won, the Cold War might have been between America and a Nazi superpower. If Japan resisted longer, Asia might have turned red under Soviet influence. And if nuclear bombs had been used in Europe, humanity might never trust technology the same way again. In 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, forcing the United States into the war. But what if the US had stayed out? Without American troops, weapons, and supplies, Britain might have fallen. The Soviet Union would have faced Germany alone, bleeding resources. The war could have ended in a stalemate, with Nazi Germany in control of Europe and Imperial Japan ruling Asia. Today, instead of one superpower America, we might live in a world dominated by 2 empires across the oceans. During the Battle of Britain in 1940, the Luftwaffe rained bombs across London. Britain stood alone, but if Britain had surrendered or signed a peace deal with Hitler, there would have been no base for the Allies to launch D-Day. The US might never have landed in Europe. Instead of Winston Churchill's "never surrender," we could remember Britain as the empire that bowed to Nazi rule. Democracy might have survived only in small pockets like Canada or Australia. One of Hitler's greatest mistakes was attacking the Soviet Union in 1941. The Eastern Front drained Germany's strength, but what if Hitler never invaded? Instead, he might have focused on crushing Britain completely. With no brutal Eastern Front, Germany could have held its power longer, maybe forcing the Allies into peace negotiations. Stalin's Soviet Union would remain isolated, and the Cold War we know today between the US and USSR might never have happened. He might have focused on crushing Britain completely. With no brutal Eastern Front, Germany could have held its power longer, maybe forcing the Allies into peace negotiations. Stalin's Soviet Union would remain isolated, And the Cold War we know today between the US and USSR might never have happened. The Manhattan Project changed history forever. But what if atomic weapons had never been developed? Japan might not have surrendered in 1945, dragging the Pacific War on for years. Millions more lives could have been lost in brutal ground invasions. And after the war, without nuclear deterrence, the Cold War might have turned hot full-scale battles between the US and Soviet Union fought with tanks and soldiers instead of the threat of nukes. The 20th century could have been one long, bloody war. So, what if World War II ended differently? Maybe we'd live in a Nazi-dominated Europe. Maybe nuclear scars would stretch across our maps. The Pacific Ocean would be a Soviet stronghold. History turned one way, but it could have so easily gone another. The world we live in today is fragile, built on the choices, victories, and tragedies of the past. What alternate ending do you think is the most terrifying? Or the most likely? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey through alternate history, subscribe to Iconic Journeys, where we explore the past, the present, and the worlds that might have been. So now we've seen 8 different ways World War II could have ended: a Nazi-controlled Europe, a nuclear-devastated world, a Soviet Pacific, or even a Britain that surrendered. Each path is terrifying in its own way. But here's the real lesson: history is fragile. The choices of leaders, the outcome of battles, the invention of one weapon can reshape the future of the entire world. Which of these alternate endings do you think would have changed our lives the most? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Iconic Journeys, where history comes alive and the past meets possibility.